In this episode, we take a look at the protests that have brought academic activities to a complete halt in one of Assam's central universities. We also talk about the crisis looming over Tamil Nadu's textile towns. But we begin today by talking about the recent government data that underlines the wide gap between demand and availability in the country's organ transplant system. Hi, I'm Ichha Sharma, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. Across India, thousands of individuals live in a state of constant waiting, hoping that a hospital will call to say that the organ they need has finally become available. And this wait can last for months, if not years. In fact, new data shared by the Union Health Ministry in Parliament last week shows that nearly 3,000 Indians died over the last 5 years while waiting for an organ transplant, and that today, more than 82,000 patients remain on the national waitlist, mostly waiting for kidneys and livers. So why is that the wait for these organs is so long? And how can India bridge the demand and supply divide in organ transplants? To break that down and understand what the data tells us, we speak to the Indian Express's Anonna Dutt in this segment. Anonna, to begin with, could you help our listeners understand how serious is India's organ transplant gap today?
So the official data that was presented in the parliament recently showed that around 2,805 people died while waiting for the organ transplants over the last 5 years. Now, of course, these numbers are likely to be an undercount because not all the people who do need an organ get registered to get one because of various reasons. They might not have the resources, etc. And this also does not account for people who might have undergone the surgery and did not survive afterwards. This is only people who've been waiting, and that too is likely an undercount. But the thing is, the organ transplants over the years have gone up in India, but the gap between the requirement and the donation still remains low. Most of the organ transplants in India are from living relatives instead of deceased donors. And even then, we're not able to keep up with the need for transplants, especially considering that kidney damage, etc., happens with diseases such as hypertension, diabetes, etc., which are also on the rise.
And Anonna, for those who may not know, what does this waiting window typically look like for a patient? Like, is it months, years?
Yes, so it can range anywhere from between a few weeks to months to years, depending on how serious your condition is, what is your blood type, what is your body type, because they have to match a donor who has similar physique and has the same blood type, etc. So all of that matching has to happen for someone to receive the organ. Also, the organ is likely to go to a sicker patient first, depending, of course, on their chances of survival, etc., and whether they have other conditions which might make it difficult for them to get a transplant. So all of these factors play in. So this is typically what I'm talking about, deceased donor organs, which is when, people die in road accidents, etc., brain death happens and their organs can be donated. I'm not talking about living donor transplants, which can happen within months of a person getting registered because there the donor is already fixed, somebody from within the family donates. So in that case, the waiting is not too long. But when it comes to deceased donor, what happens is the hospital in which the patient dies gets one of the kidneys and can keep other organs depending on their patient waiting list. And if they cannot utilize it, then it goes into, so basically in the same area, the hospital would try to look for other hospitals who can do the transplant. If that doesn't happen, it goes into the state level transplant committee, which looks at all hospitals in the state. If that doesn't happen, then it goes to the regional. So, it would look for hospitals in the north, south, east, west region of the country. If that also does not happen, then it reaches the national pool from where it can be allocated anywhere in the country. So this whole allocation process as well as the patient's condition both play into how long they would have to wait for an organ.
Right. And so which organ would you say is usually the most in demand?
So when it comes to the most common transplant, it is kidney transplant. That is because it is a transplant that has been perfected by many of the hospitals in the country. So there are just a lot more hospitals offering kidney transplants. It is also much less complex than the other transplants, and the cost of the kidney transplant is also less than several other transplants like liver transplant, etc. So that is the reason why kidney transplant, it's not that that is the only reason, it's also that people do need kidney transplants more because that's the organ also that gets damaged with, like I mentioned, diabetes, hypertension, etc. Other than that, we have liver transplant, lung transplant, we have heart transplant. All of these are much less common. So if we look at the number of transplants that have been performed in the country over the last 5 years, that is between 2020 and 2024, there have been over 53,000 kidney transplants, almost 18,000 liver transplant, 957 heart transplants, 769 lung transplants, and only 130 pancreas transplants. These are the most common. There is also some small bowel transplants that happen. There are also, people donating their skins, hand, etc. for transplants. But those are very infrequent.
Right. And Anonna, we understand that there are multiple allocation systems. Some have scoring methods, some use seniority-based lists. So how does this system operate? And also, does it affect like who gets an organ and who keeps waiting?
Definitely. So right now we have state lists. So every hospital puts up their own list and then it's collated into a state list, which is then collated into a national list. Now the problem is, while there is a centralized waiting list, the allocation process is not the same in every state. So every state right now follows a different allocation pattern because the law did not mandate a particular pattern of allocation when it was initially passed. And I mean, now slowly, of course, the regulatory body, which is the National Organ and Tissue Transplant Organization, is trying to formalize the process and trying to bring all the states on board and have the same process of allocation. But at the moment, different states do different things. So, for example, some states follow a scoring method where what is your condition, what is your age, and sometimes if you're a woman, they would score you higher. So all of these, you're getting points on it, and then eventually then whoever gets the higher point gets the organ. So states like Telangana, Maharashtra, Gujarat, they have this kind of a scoring method. Then there are states like West Bengal, Karnataka, Rajasthan, Kerala, which allocate organs based on who is registered first on their registry. Then there is Tamil Nadu, which has created zones within the state. So you would get an organ. So, for example, a lot of people might pass away in hospitals in Chennai. So, places in and around Chennai are much more likelier to get these organs than, say, a place which is farther away, because Tamil Nadu has its own internal regional allocation system. Then there are places like Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh which give priority to patients who do not have a living related donor. So all of these different criteria are followed right now in India. So you cannot always predict what your number on the list will be.
And so is this why the National Organ and Tissue Transplant Organization, or NOTO, is now pushing to change that?
Yes, the organization NOTO is trying to move towards a uniform process where the patients will also get a login ID and would be able to see where on the state list, where on the regional list, where on the national list they stand, so that they actually get a fair idea of when they might get an organ through this allocation process.
And Anonna, the recent data suggests that Maharashtra tops the waitlist, followed by Gujarat and Tamil Nadu. So what explains these regional concentrations? Like, is it because of the population size or better registration systems?
So definitely population size, because Maharashtra is, I wouldn't say the most populous, but it is a state where there is a high population as well as good medical facilities where you can get the transplants. Delhi, of course, is the place which performs the highest number of transplants across the country. But most of those transplants are from living related people. It's not the deceased organs. When it comes to organs from deceased persons, I think Tamil Nadu is on top. So yes, this waiting list is also accordingly. So states which perform well on, transplantation are the states where a maximum number of registrations also happen. So, people from other states might also come to Delhi or Maharashtra to get their transplants and therefore be in their transplant list. So that's how the waiting list also works.
Right, and as you mentioned earlier, that most transplants in India still come from living relatives, not deceased donors. So why is that we rely so heavily on living donors?
So the challenge with India is that even though we have about 1 lakh people dying every year in road crashes, we're not able to utilize organs from these people. So actually, the people who die in road crashes make for an ideal candidate for organ donation because usually they would, have brain death before circulatory death. Circulatory death is what we associate with death, but brain death is when the brain activity completely stops, but the patient is still alive, so to say. The processes in their body is going on because of the machines they are on. And they are the ideal candidate for organ donation because the organs can sustain only up to a certain number of hours outside the body of the patient. The unfortunate thing is that even though we have so many road crash deaths, we are not able to convert them into donors. And that could be because of several different reasons. One is that counseling the families at the time this is happening. It's a very difficult scenario where a family is losing someone and it's very unexpected. It's not like they have had some long illness or anything. It's just a very sudden sort of death. So the families are grieving, and at that time we do need the transplant coordinators to be present there, to be counseling the families, to be, explaining the process of how organ donation works. And that does not happen everywhere. It would happen probably in the big hospitals, but it doesn't happen everywhere. That is one reason. Second reason is there's also a lot of negative feelings that people have towards organ donations. There are a lot of myths surrounding it. So, for example, there are myths which people believe that if they donate the organs, then the person would be born in the next life without the organs. That's why they would say, no, they don't want to do it. Or there are religious reasons where they say that, okay, we do not want the body to be cut open, before, the last rites happen. So that again plays in. So all of these things have to be explained to the families. And for that, we do have people called transplant coordinators. But right now, our conversion from brain death to organ donor is not very good. So that is one reason for, why we have more living donor transplants than deceased donors.
And also, Anonna, are hospitals equipped to identify and retrieve organs quickly when a potential donor becomes available?
So it has improved over the years. Over the last 10 years, the number of hospitals that can retrieve organs and that can transplant organs have gone up a lot. There are about 700 such centers across the country. Of course, the density is much higher in cities like Delhi, Chennai, Bombay, etc. So you would have a higher density of hospitals who can do this in these cities, but also in smaller cities, in tier 2 cities, also there are hospitals that have come up which are equipped to do transplants. And if not transplants, they're at least equipped to, harvest the organs. And then they can preserve it and send it on to hospitals that can do the transplants. There's also a push from the government to ensure that all the medical colleges that it runs are actually able to perform transplants and at least, if not that, do the organ retrieval. So there has been a push and the numbers are increasing. So the treatment is becoming more and more accessible.
And also, even when an organ becomes available, cost often remains a barrier. So how does that affect the ecosystem?
So yes, cost is a barrier. When it comes to, like I mentioned, kidney transplants are cheaper than the other transplants. And of course, there are government centers now that do perform organ transplants where also the patients have to pay some amount, but they can access it. So also people may avail the benefit of Ayushman Bharat for kidney transplant at least. So, there are certain ways, and there are other health schemes which can also support the more expensive transplants like Rasha Arogya Nidhi, or there are state funds, etc., which people may access. But yes, cost does play a role in determining who can get the transplant or not.
And lastly, Anonna, can a longer waiting list sometimes indicate better registration access rather than poorer healthcare?
Definitely. So the reason why there are so many people waiting in Delhi or Tamil Nadu or Maharashtra is because these are the places that also perform very well when it comes to transplantation. They also have one of the highest densities of hospitals which perform the transplants. So that is the reason you would also see more people registering there. But at the end of the day, our job is to ensure that people do get this treatment and that we do have more people donating the organs. And there has been some change of behavior. There was a spike, especially after the PM mentioned it in one of the Man Ki Baat episodes like 4 or 5 years ago. There was a jump in organ donations. So likely the awareness campaigns and all should help, and people should, be more conscious and donate. And for everybody else out there, there is a government website which you can use. You can go to the NOTO website and there is a registration link. Everybody can sign up as an organ donor, and it actually asks for your Aadhaar number so that if there is an unfortunate incident where you're in hospital, they can verify that with your Aadhaar number and see that you have consented to organ donation, to even have your family know your wishes. And yes, it also requires that you put in the number of one of your loved ones. So it can be your partner or your parents or your sibling. And, so that kind of forces people to have the conversation about organ donation. So hopefully more people register on this website and become donors.
And next, we turn our attention to the protests taking place at one of Assam's 2 central universities. For over 2 months now, students, teachers, and non-teaching staff at Tezpur University have been protesting, demanding the removal of the Vice-Chancellor, a standoff that has brought academic activities to a complete halt. Both students and staff have accused Vice-Chancellor Shambhunath Singh of financial irregularities and prolonged absence from the campus, which according to them has led to an administrative stagnation. To understand their concerns better, my colleague Shashank Bhargava spoke to the Indian Express's Sukrita Baruah, who has been reporting on the issue.
Sukrita, in most cases involving protests at universities, we mainly see students protesting, right? But this is not the case in Tezpur. There we've seen both students and teachers coming together. So tell us, what are these two groups concerned about?
When I was speaking to protesting staff and students, I kind of got the sense that the anger that is there against the Vice-Chancellor by the protesters is kind of greater than a sum of its parts. Because a lot of the grievances have been communicated by the Tezpur University Teachers Association. And these are mostly administrative grievances. Okay, so there are a bunch of different allegations that they've raised, from alleged financial irregularities to, say, irregularities in appointments. So they have an issue with the extension of the tenure of the finance officer. And they say that, a certain directorial position in the university, which should be occupied by by a faculty member, a third party has been employed on a contract basis with a full salary. So such concerns. And they've given, a list of different financial irregularities that they're highlighting. For example, they allege irregularities in a purchase of ebooks for the library, in the purchase of, 14 crores worth of furniture for the hostels. They're saying that, inflated tenders have been used for procuring this material and so on.
Right, but a lot of these concerns seem very administrative. So how is it that students are concerned about it and concerned enough that they have been staging these protests?
So actually, the protest started more as an emotive thing. And these administrative issues and these administrative allegations came later. So the whole thing started in September when Zubeen Garg died. And as you know, it's been like a huge emotive issue in Assam, and it's really influenced a lot of things that have happened in the state. And a lot of things in the state have been influenced by emotion since Zubeen Garg's death.
And Zubeen Garg, of course, was a very popular singer and composer from the state and who recently passed away.
Right, and something that has brought the state to its knees, right? So on September 19th, Zubeen Garg passed away, and state mourning was announced in Assam. And the Tezpur University doesn't have a students' union, they have a students' council. So the student council elections were supposed to take place on September 20th, and it took place as scheduled. And apparently there was a lot of student unhappiness about this, like moving on as usual. And now the protesting students allege that, they wanted to hold a condolence meet and they need permission for that as well from the university. So when they kind of broach that, they claim that it was met with insensitivity and, callousness. That's what they say. So that is kind of the spark. And there were protests. And at that time, the VC was not in campus, which is amongst the things that they allege, right? That he is consistently not available on campus. And there was a lot of protests, and that's a spark. So that there was a massive outpouring of outrage at that time. And then the students went on protest because of that. And then they say that our teachers came and they told us, actually, there are these issues as well, which made the protest gain momentum. And, first they were demanding an apology from the Vice Chancellor for the alleged, insensitive handling of sentiment in the aftermath of Zubeen Garg's death. We demand his resignation. I did speak to several of the protesting students, and they say that, things have been mounting for a while because apparently a lot of funding was cut for student welfare events, say, for example, hostel events, or say even department conferences, or even something small like Fresher. So they were saying that we were feeling, that corners were being cut. The university used to employ a lot of guest faculty, and all those guest faculty were discontinued, and the PhD students were brought on to, fill the gaps.
Right. So the work that these guest teachers were doing, now the PhD students are having to do it
with much less remuneration. So that is amongst the things that students say that they were experiencing throughout, but they say that, we couldn't put a finger on what's wrong. And then they said that when our teachers told us such and such. So obviously there were student emotions, and then, the staff are obviously carrying grievances also, which they presented to the students. And both these concerns, then student concerns and staff concerns, have kind of come together as one. So there's a whole list of grievances that the staff have presented as well. I spoke to a senior administrative member and I asked, how come it has taken on such a scale, the protest? And the staff member said, one of the big factors is high-handedness in communicating with colleagues, which is something that was rankling amongst the staff for a long time. And this tipping point was basically what happened in the aftermath of Zubeen Garg's death. So that was, of course, more than 2 months ago. And the protests have been carrying on strong since then.
And how has Shambhunath Singh reacted to these protests? And also, has he been present at the campus while all this has been going on?
No, so I think he was present for a short while after, this alleged insensitivity issue came up. And since late September, he has not been present in the campus. And he's been tight-lipped. So, of course, while doing these stories, I have reached out to him multiple times. And he said that he's not willing to talk to the media at all. So he declined comment. But in the early days of the protest, there was a clarification issued by his office in his name, which said that, there was a misunderstanding when it came to this alleged insensitivity. And he said that as for the allegations of financial irregularities, everything has been done as per the book. And if I have been away from campus, it's because of work. But that's more than 2 months old now. So now a lot has happened. There has been a fact-finding committee that was constituted by the governor of Assam, which came to the campus. Though, I did speak to one of the fact-finding committee members, and they said that there's been no follow-up on their findings. And I asked, did you find any veracity to the allegations? And he said, to some degree, yes. So he says that there's not been much follow-up in this regard. At the same time, MOE delegations have come to whom the different stakeholders have given their statements, have submitted their memorandum. And apparently the delegation proposed that they promised that there'll be a visitorial inquiry. So the visitor of the university, the president, right? The president of the country, since it's a central university. So they were not happy and then they blockaded the exit. So for a long time, this delegation was stranded in the university. They couldn't exit the university because the passageway, the carriageway was blocked by protesters. So finally, they gave a handwritten assurance that, we will work towards having a time-bound inquiry. But they are still not happy with that since there was no concrete action has been taken yet. So the protests continue.
So does that mean that all major university activities, including classes, are not going on right now?
No, classes have not been going on, but the exams were supposed to begin earlier this month. So those got postponed, but the exams have begun now. So the protests continue while exams are taking place because you can't indefinitely postpone exams. So those are taking place, but the protests are still taking place.
And in the end, we take a look at how global trade politics is impacting Tamil Nadu's textile towns. Chief Minister M.K. Stalin yesterday wrote to Prime Minister Narendra Modi, warning that steep US tariffs on Indian goods are pushing some of the state's most employment-intensive industries toward a crisis. As reported by the Indian Express's Arun Janardhanan, the tariffs imposed by the Trump administration have hit textiles, apparel, leather, and footwear especially hard. Together, these sectors form the backbone of Tamil Nadu's export economy, employing nearly 85 lakh workers, many of them women and migrant workers. In Tezpur alone, which is widely known as a major knitwear hub, exporters report cancelled orders worth 15,000 crore rupees and production cuts of up to 30%. In his letter, Stalin said the US has imposed tariffs of up to 50% on certain Indian exports, which he described as having an immediate and damaging impact on export-oriented manufacturing clusters. He noted that Tamil Nadu accounts for around 28% of India's textile and apparel exports and nearly 40% of its leather and footwear exports. Stalin further said that exporters in Tirupur, Coimbatore, Erode and Karur districts are facing combined revenue losses of about 60 crore rupees per day. He warned that many small and medium enterprises are struggling to sustain operations under these conditions. Similar pressures are being felt in footwear manufacturing clusters in Vellore, Ranipet and Tirupattur districts, where export demand has weakened. The letter highlights that exporters are being forced to offer discounts to retain overseas buyers, which is reducing profit margins and affecting long-term competitiveness. Stalin said layoffs and wage deferrals have already begun, raising concerns about income security for workers and the stability of local economies dependent on these industries. He also warned that international buyers are shifting orders to countries such as Vietnam, Bangladesh, and Cambodia, which currently face lower tariffs. Stalin said that once supply chains move to other countries, they are unlikely to return, potentially undermining India's manufacturing base and employment generation efforts. Stalin urged the PM to prioritize an early resolution of the issue through bilateral engagement with the United States. You were listening to Three Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar and produced by Shashank, Bhargava and me, Ichha Sharma. If you like the show, do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcast. You can also recommend it to someone you think may like it, with a friend or in your family. This is the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Podcast or write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.